Sometimes the most precious moments happen when we're not looking for them. When David Martinez knelt down to fix his daughter's bicycle on a quiet Tuesday evening, he had no idea that simple act of love would change two families forever. David works construction during the day and fixes anything he can at night to make ends meet. His 8-year-old daughter Sophia believes her daddy can repair the whole world with his gentle hands and patient heart. Across the fence, little Lucy Thompson watches through the chain links, fascinated by this father who has time for broken things. Lucy's mother Rachel works 2 jobs and rarely has a moment to breathe, let alone fix bicycles. When she comes home exhausted from her evening shift, she finds her daughter staring at their neighbor with pure wonder. That's when Lucy asks the question that changes everything. "Mummy, why don't you marry the nice man who fixes things?" But can a child's innocent wish really heal 2 broken hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as David Martinez loaded his battered pickup truck with tools that had seen better decades. His weathered toolbox sat in the passenger seat, a collection of hammers, wrenches, and screwdrivers passed down from his father, each one worn smooth by years of honest work. The metal box bore scratches and dents like battle scars, but every tool inside still served its purpose faithfully. "Daddy, can we work on my bike when you get home?" Sophia called from the front steps of their small duplex apartment. At 8 years old, she possessed an unshakable faith that her father could fix anything broken in this world. Her dark eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had drawn him to her mother years ago, before cancer stole that light away. "Of course, mija," David replied, his voice carrying the gentle patience that had become his trademark. "But remember what I always tell you about broken things. They just need someone who cares enough to make them work again," Sophia recited, grinning as she bounced on her toes. David smiled, though something heavy settled in his chest as he drove away. The truth was more complicated than his 8-year-old daughter understood. Sometimes caring wasn't enough. Sometimes the parts were too damaged, or the cost of repair exceeded what a person could afford. He'd learned this lesson 3 years ago, when Maria's medical bills began arriving faster than his construction wages could cover them. The debt still followed him like a shadow, $37,000 in medical expenses that insurance wouldn't touch. Credit cards maxed out, payment plans that barely made a dent in the principal, and collection notices that arrived with mechanical regularity. David had grown skilled at opening them without Sophia noticing, filing them away in a shoebox under his bed, where dreams went to die. But he never let his daughter see the worry lines that had etched themselves deeper around his eyes, or the way he calculated every grocery purchase twice before reaching the checkout counter. Sophia's world remained full of possibility, and David intended to keep it that way for as long as humanly possible. Their apartment reflected this careful balance between reality and hope. The furniture came from thrift stores and garage sales, but Sophia's drawings decorated every wall with the vibrancy of a child's imagination. The kitchen table wobbled slightly. David had been meaning to fix it for months, but it held their nightly homework sessions and weekend art projects without complaint. Sophia's bedroom was a sanctuary of stuffed animals and library books, proof that love could transform any space into something magical. Across the narrow backyard, separated by a chain-link fence that had seen better years, lived another family navigating their own delicate balance. Rachel Thompson had been awake since 4:30 that morning, preparing for her shift at Mel's Diner downtown. At 28, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to accomplish twice as much in half the time. Her hands, though soft when she tucked Lucy into bed each night, bore the calluses of someone who scrubbed floors and carried heavy trays for 10 hours at a stretch. The diner job paid decent tips when the lunch crowd was generous, but it wasn't enough to support 2 people in this economy. That's why Rachel also cleaned office buildings on weekends, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, while other families enjoyed their days off together. By Sunday evening, exhaustion settled into her bones like an old friend, but Monday always came anyway. Lucy Thompson, at 6 years old, possessed the quiet observation skills of a child who had learned to entertain herself. While other kids her age threw tantrums when parents said no, Lucy had internalized the weight of their circumstances without fully understanding them. She knew Mummy worked hard, that money was tight, and that asking for things sometimes made the tired lines around her mother's eyes grow deeper. Their apartment was smaller than David and Sophia's, with a living room that doubled as Lucy's play area after the coffee table was pushed aside. Rachel had painted the walls a cheerful yellow when they first moved in, determined to create brightness even when the budget allowed for little else. Lucy's artwork joined her mother's efforts, covering the refrigerator and bathroom mirror with crayon masterpieces that transformed their modest space into a gallery of hope. But there were empty spaces too, the spot on the living room wall where a family photo should hang, the second bedroom that remained unfurnished because they couldn't afford a proper guest room, the silence that settled over dinner when Lucy asked questions about fathers and families that looked different from theirs. Rachel's ex-husband had disappeared 18 months ago, leaving behind child support payments that never materialized and promises that proved as insubstantial as morning mist. She'd stopped checking her phone for messages from him, stopped explaining to Lucy why Daddy didn't call on birthdays. Some wounds healed better when you stopped picking at them. The neighborhood around them had its own rhythm, established by years of families coming and going like seasons. Maple Street wasn't the kind of place featured in home magazines, but it possessed something more valuable than perfect landscaping. The quiet solidarity of people who understood struggle without needing to discuss it. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 houses down always had extra vegetables from her garden. The Johnsons across the street kept an eye on everyone's kids during summer afternoons. When old Mr. Patterson's furnace died last winter, 3 neighbors showed up with space heaters and casseroles without being asked. These weren't grand gestures of charity, but the small kindnesses that made survival possible. David had become part of this informal network over the past 2 years, fixing leaky faucets for elderly neighbors who couldn't afford plumbers, helping younger families move furniture up narrow staircases, teaching teenage boys how to change oil in beat-up cars. He never asked for payment, though sometimes people left groceries on his doorstep or insisted Sophia keep the cookies they'd baked for the recipe testing. Rachel had noticed these acts of quiet generosity from her kitchen window. She watched David spend Saturday mornings repairing Mrs. Patterson's front steps, saw him teaching the Martinez twins how to ride bicycles in the empty parking lot behind the corner store. There was something steady about him, something reliable that she'd forgotten existed in men. But Rachel had learned to be cautious about her observations. Attraction felt dangerous when you were responsible for a small person who had already experienced too much disappointment. Better to keep interactions polite but distant, to appreciate good neighbors from the safety of your own yard. That's why she'd been surprised when Lucy began asking questions about the man who fixes things. Her daughter had been watching their neighbors with the intensity of a nature documentary filmmaker, cataloging David's patience with Sophia's endless questions, his gentle way of explaining how mechanical things worked. He never gets mad, Lucy had observed one evening as they watched through their kitchen window. Even when she drops the screws, he just picks them up and shows her again. Rachel had nodded absently, though her heart performed an unexpected flutter at her daughter's words. She'd been married to a man who threw tools when projects didn't go according to plan, who considered children's curiosity an interruption rather than an opportunity. Watching David's natural teaching instincts felt like witnessing something foreign and wonderful. The evening that would change everything began like any other Tuesday. David returned from a construction site where he'd spent 10 hours installing drywall in a commercial building, his back aching and his hands stained with joint compound. Sophia greeted him at the door with the boundless energy that had somehow survived their circumstances intact. "Daddy, my bike chain came off again, and I tried to fix it like you showed me, but it's really tangled this time." David followed his daughter to their small back porch, where her pink bicycle lay on its side like a wounded soldier. The chain had indeed wrapped itself around the gears in a way that would challenge even experienced mechanics. But as David knelt beside the bike, his expression remained patient and encouraging. "Well, let's see what we're working with here," he said, running his fingers along the twisted metal. "Remember what I taught you about complicated problems. Break them down into small pieces," Sophia recited, settling cross-legged beside him. "And don't get frustrated when something looks harder than it really is." Across the fence, a small face appeared at the gap in the chain links. Lucy Thompson, drawn by the sound of voices and the promise of watching someone fix something broken. As David worked, explaining each step to Sophia in terms she could understand, he became aware of their audience. The little girl from next door watched with the focused attention of someone witnessing magic, her small fingers wrapped around the metal fence links. This was the moment when everything changed, though none of them realized it yet. A simple bicycle repair on an ordinary Tuesday evening, observed by a lonely child who had been waiting her whole life to see what fatherhood looked like when it was done right. The chain came free with a satisfying click, and Sophia cheered as if her father had just performed surgery. David smiled, wiping his hands on an old rag, unaware that across the fence, Lucy Thompson was forming a wish so powerful it would rearrange both their worlds. The Tuesday evening air carried the scent of dinner preparations from kitchen windows along Maple Street as David knelt beside Sophia's bicycle, his calloused fingers working through the twisted chain with practiced patience. The pink bike had been a birthday gift from his late wife, one of the last presents Maria had chosen before the cancer made shopping trips impossible. Now it served as both transportation and teaching tool, a way for David to pass on his father's lessons about persistence and problem-solving. "See how the chain wraps around this gear?" David pointed to the small metal teeth. "It's like a puzzle. Everything has to line up just right, or the whole system stops working." Sophia nodded solemnly, her 8-year-old face serious with concentration. "Like when you fix the washing machine, and all the parts have to be friends with each other." "Exactly like that, Mija." David smiled at his daughter's way of humanizing mechanical things. Sophia had inherited her mother's gift for finding personality in inanimate objects, a trait that made even the most mundane repairs feel like acts of rescue. From across the narrow yard, Lucy Thompson pressed her face against the chain-link fence, her small hands gripping the metal links as she watched this foreign ritual of father-daughter collaboration. At 6 years old, Lucy had seen plenty of broken things in her short life. Toys with missing pieces, appliances that wheezed and stopped working, promises that crumbled like old paper. But she had never witnessed the careful process of making something broken become whole again. David became aware of their audience as he worked, glancing up to see the little girl's wide eyes tracking his every movement. Her intense focus reminded him of Sophia when she was younger, that hungry way children watched adults perform what seemed like magic. "Are you stuck?" Lucy called through the fence, her voice carrying the earnest concern of someone who knew what it felt like when things couldn't be fixed. "Not stuck," David replied, looking up from the bicycle chain. "Just taking our time." The chain got itself in a pretty good tangle, but chains want to work properly. Sometimes they just need someone to help them remember how. Lucy moved closer to the fence, positioning herself where she could see through the largest gap in the links. "My tricycle doesn't work right either. The pedals make a squeaky noise, and sometimes they don't want to turn." Sophia perked up immediately. "Daddy can fix anything. He fixed our toaster and our doorknob and the wobbly chair and—" "Sophia," David interrupted gently, though his heart warmed at his daughter's faith in his abilities. Lucy's mother might prefer to take care of their repairs herself, but Lucy shook her head vigorously. "Mommy doesn't know how to fix things. She says we'll get someone to look at it when we have extra money. But we never have extra money." The simple honesty in the child's words hit David like a physical blow. He recognized the careful way Lucy had learned to speak about money, the same protective language Sophia sometimes used when discussing things they couldn't afford. It was the vocabulary of children who had learned too early that wanting and having were different things. "Well," David said carefully, "maybe I could take a look at your tricycle sometime, if your mummy says it's okay." Lucy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You would do that?" Before David could respond, the sound of tired footsteps on gravel announced Rachel Thompson's return from her evening shift at the diner. She appeared around the corner of their duplex, her uniform wrinkled and her dark hair escaped from its ponytail. But her face softened when she saw her daughter's excitement. "Lucy, honey, are you bothering the neighbors?" "I'm watching Daddy fix Sophia's bike," Lucy announced, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "And he said maybe he could fix my tricycle too, if you say it's okay." Rachel's cheeks flushed as she took in the scene, her daughter pressed against the fence, the man kneeling beside his own child's bicycle, both of them looking up at her with expressions of friendly welcome. She felt suddenly aware of her appearance after a long shift, of the way her uniform smelled like coffee and French fries, of the exhaustion that probably showed around her eyes. "Oh, you really don't need to," Rachel began, but David was already standing, wiping his hands on an old rag. "It's no trouble," he said, his voice carrying the easy warmth that had drawn their neighbors to trust him with their own repair needs. "I enjoy working on mechanical things, and it would give the girls a chance to play together." Sophia bounced on her toes. "Lucy could come over and watch. I could show her how chains work and how gears fit together. And, Sophia, breathe." David laughed, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Let's not overwhelm anyone." But Lucy was already turning to her mother with pleading eyes. "Can I, Mommy? Can I bring my tricycle over so the fixing man can make it not squeaky?" Rachel found herself caught between pride and practicality. They couldn't afford to pay for repairs, but accepting charity felt like admitting defeat. Yet watching her daughter's excitement was like seeing sunlight break through clouds that had been gathering for months. "I don't want to impose," Rachel said finally. "And I should probably mention that I can't really pay you for your time right now." "I wouldn't accept payment anyway," David interrupted gently. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's how communities work." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither adult was quite ready to examine. Rachel studied David's face, searching for hidden motives or expectations, but found only genuine kindness and the slightly awkward posture of a man trying not to overstep boundaries. "Mommy," Lucy said, tugging on Rachel's uniform skirt, "say yes, please say yes." That's when it happened, the moment that would be replayed in both families' memories for years to come. Lucy, with the fearless honesty that only 6-year-old children possess, looked from her tired mother to the kind man who fixed things, and asked the question that changed everything. "Why don't you just marry him, Mommy? Then he could fix all our broken stuff, and I could have a daddy who knows how to make things work, and Sophia could have a mommy who makes really good pancakes." The silence that followed Lucy's words was so complete that the distant sound of traffic seemed to fade away. David's hands went still on the bicycle chain. Rachel's face went through several shades of red. Sophia's eyes grew round with the possibilities her new friend had just outlined. "Lucy," Rachel whispered, her voice strangled with embarrassment. "You can't just people don't just—" "Why not?" Lucy asked, with the logical persistence of childhood. "You said you wished I had a daddy who was nice to me, and he's nice to Sophia all the time. And you're really good at taking care of people, so you could take care of him too. And then we could all live together, and nobody would have to be lonely anymore." David cleared his throat, his own face warm with the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. "Lucy, that's very sweet of you to think about, but grown-ups have to—" "You like my mummy," Lucy interrupted with confident certainty. "I can tell because you smile different when you look at her than when you look at other people. And Mommy likes you too because she watches you through the kitchen window when she thinks I'm not paying attention." Now it was Rachel's turn to look mortified. Lucy Elizabeth Thompson, and Sophia wants a mummy, Lucy continued, building steam. She told me yesterday that she asks her daddy for one every time she blows out birthday candles. So if you got married, everyone would get what they wanted, and nobody would have to be sad anymore. The two adults stared at each other across the fence, seeing their carefully guarded feelings reflected in each other's eyes. David was the first to speak, his voice gentle but slightly strained. Lucy, sweetie, marriage is more complicated than fixing bicycles. People have to know each other really well before they make that kind of decision. So get to know each other, Lucy said, with the exasperated tone of someone explaining something obvious to slow adults. That's what friends do. They talk and spend time together and learn about each other. And then, if they like what they learn, they get married and live happily ever after. Sophia, who had been listening with growing excitement, suddenly clapped her hands together. Lucy's right. We could be sisters. And we could have family dinners and go to the park together and... Girls, David said firmly but kindly, you need to slow down. These are big ideas that require a lot of thought. But the damage was done. The seed had been planted, the possibility spoken aloud. Lucy's innocent suggestion hung in the evening air like a bridge. Neither adult had been brave enough to build themselves, but now couldn't unsee. Rachel looked at David, really looked at him, seeing past the friendly neighbor to the gentleman who taught his daughter patience, who offered help without expecting anything in return, who had somehow raised a child full of joy despite obvious struggles of his own. David looked back at Rachel, seeing past the tired single mother to the woman who worked 2 jobs to provide for her daughter, who had painted their apartment yellow to bring in light, who had raised a child with enough love and security to believe in happy endings. And in that moment, both of them wondered if a 6-year-old might understand something about happiness that adults had forgotten in their careful calculations of risk and responsibility. The crumpled work schedule in Rachel's pocket felt heavier than it should as she walked to Mel's diner the next morning. Written in her own careful handwriting were the numbers that governed her life. Double shifts Monday through Friday, weekend cleaning jobs at the office complex downtown, and exactly 37 minutes between jobs to grab coffee and pretend she wasn't running on 3 hours of sleep. Lucy's words from the evening before echoed in her mind with embarrassing clarity. Why don't you just marry him, Mummy? The question had lodged itself somewhere between her rational thoughts and her secret hopes, refusing to be dismissed as childhood fantasy. Because the truth was, Rachel had noticed David Martinez long before her daughter decided to play matchmaker. She'd watched him through her kitchen window, more often than she cared to admit, drawn by his patient way of teaching Sophia about the world. There was something mesmerizing about a man who never raised his voice, who treated a child's endless questions as genuine opportunities for conversation rather than interruptions to more important business. During her lunch break, Rachel found herself staring out the diner window instead of reviewing the bills in her purse. Her co-worker Diane, a woman in her 50s who had been serving coffee and wisdom in equal measure for 20 years, slid into the booth across from her. "You've got that look," Diane observed, stirring sugar into her coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the motion decades ago. "What? Look. The look women get when they're thinking about a man they shouldn't be thinking about." Diane's eyes crinkled with humor. "Care to share what's got you so distracted you've been putting salt in the sugar dispensers?" Rachel's cheeks warmed. "It's nothing. Just neighbor stuff." The kind of neighbor stuff that makes you check your reflection in every shiny surface and actually use lip gloss to work a Wednesday lunch shift. Before Rachel could protest, the bell above the diner door chimed, and her heart performed an unexpected somersault. David Martinez walked in, his work clothes clean but bearing the permanent stains that marked him as someone who worked with his hands. He spotted Rachel immediately and offered a smile that made her forget how to breathe properly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, approaching their booth with the slight awkwardness of someone navigating new social territory. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought Lucy's tricycle home with me last night to take a look at it. Rachel had forgotten about the tricycle entirely, lost as she'd been in the mortification of her daughter's marriage proposal. "Oh, you really didn't have to. The pedals just needed some lubricant and a minor adjustment," David continued. "Nothing major. I was wondering if Sophia and I could bring it by this evening, maybe around 6. Sophia's been asking all morning when she gets to see Lucy again." Diane raised her eyebrows meaningfully, but David didn't notice. His attention was focused entirely on Rachel, whose carefully constructed defenses were crumbling under the weight of simple kindness. "That would be nice," Rachel managed. "Lucy hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday. You and Sophia, I mean. She's excited about having friends so close by." "Good," David said, his smile reaching his eyes. "Sophia feels the same way. It's been just the two of us for a long time. Having other people around who care about her, it means more than you might realize." After David left, Diane leaned back in the booth with the satisfied expression of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. "Neighbor stuff, my foot. That man is smitten, and you're not exactly fighting it off with a stick." "Diane, Rachel, honey, I've been watching people fall in love in this diner for 2 decades. That man just found 3 different ways to work your daughter's name into a conversation about bicycle repairs. And you lit up like a Christmas tree the moment he walked through that door." Rachel stared into her coffee, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded her of the careful way David had untangled Sophia's bicycle chain. "It's complicated. Love usually is, but sometimes the complicated parts aren't as important as we think they are." That evening, Rachel found herself changing clothes twice before David and Sophia arrived. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, she told herself, but because her work uniform smelled like French fries and her weekend cleaning clothes had bleach stains. The yellow sundress she finally settled on was practical, easy to wash, comfortable for playing with children in the backyard. Lucy had positioned herself at the front window an hour early, her face pressed against the glass as she watched for their neighbors. When David appeared with Sophia and the tricycle, Lucy's squeal of excitement could probably be heard 3 houses away. "They're here, Mummy, they're here, and look, my tricycle has shiny wheels." The tricycle did indeed look transformed. The rust spots had been sanded away and painted over, the seat wiped clean, the chain gleaming with fresh oil. But more impressive than the repairs was the way David had involved Sophia in the process. The little girl proudly carried a small bag of the tools they'd used, ready to explain each step to Lucy. "Daddy showed me how to take apart the pedals," Sophia announced as soon as they'd gathered in the backyard. "And we use special oil that smells like lemons to make everything move smooth again." Lucy climbed onto her tricycle with reverent care, as if it were a precious gift rather than a second-hand toy rescued from a garage sale. When she pedaled around the small yard without a single squeak, her laughter was pure joy. "It works perfect," she called to David. "It's like you made it brand new." "Not brand new," David corrected gently. "But sometimes, things that are a little worn just need someone to pay attention to them, to clean off the dirt and oil, the moving parts, and tighten the loose screws." Rachel heard the metaphor in his words, saw the way his eyes met hers over the children's heads. The message was clear. Some things were worth the effort to restore. As the evening progressed, the barriers Rachel had carefully constructed began to feel less necessary. David asked thoughtful questions about her work, listened to Lucy's elaborate stories about her imaginary pet dragon, and somehow managed to make Rachel laugh for the first time in weeks. When Sophia skinned her knee on the rough concrete, he cleaned the scrape with the practiced gentleness of a parent who had dealt with countless minor injuries. "All better," he said, securing a bandage decorated with cartoon characters. "What do we say about scrapes and bruises?" "They're proof we're brave enough to try new things," Sophia recited, already running off to rejoin Lucy. "Good philosophy," Rachel observed. "My wife used to say that," David said quietly, then looked surprised at his own admission. I don't talk about her much anymore." "You don't have to explain." Rachel's voice was gentle. Losing someone you love, it changes everything. Yes, it does. David studied her face with curious eyes. Your husband, ex-husband. And he's very much alive, just very much gone. Rachel's laugh held no humor. Not the same thing, I know. But the empty space feels similar sometimes. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughters attempt to teach the tricycle how to perform tricks it was never designed for. The evening air carried the scent of barbecue from a neighbor's yard and the distant sound of children playing in other backyards along Maple Street. Lucy was right about one thing, David said eventually. What's that? Sophia does want a mother. She hasn't said it directly, but I see it in the way she watches other families at the park. The way she studies mothers and daughters when we're at the grocery store. David's voice carried the weight of a parent, trying to be everything to a child who needed more than one person could provide. And Lucy does want a father, Rachel admitted, a real one, someone who shows up and stays and doesn't make promises he can't keep. The honesty hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. David reached out to steady the fence post that wobbled whenever the children leaned against it, his hands automatically assessing what would be needed to make the repair permanent. I could fix this, he said, more to himself than to Rachel. The whole fence section is loose, just needs some concrete and a few hours of work. You don't have to fix everything, you know, Rachel said softly. David looked at her, seeing past the polite deflection to the woman who was trying to protect herself from disappointment. Maybe not everything, but some things are worth fixing. Some things are worth the time and effort it takes to make them stable. The fence post wobbled again under Sophia's enthusiastic leaning, and Rachel found herself wondering if David was still talking about construction projects. As they said their goodbyes that evening, Lucy threw her arms around David's waist with the unconscious affection of a child who had decided he belonged in her world. Sophia hugged Rachel with equal enthusiasm, and for a moment the four of them felt like something that could be permanent. Later, after the neighbors had gone home and Lucy was bathed and tucked into bed, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with her work schedule spread before her. 47 hours at the diner this week, plus 12 hours of weekend cleaning. Every hour accounted for, every dollar needed for rent and groceries, and the thousand small expenses that came with raising a child alone. But for the first time in months, Rachel found herself wondering what her schedule might look like if she didn't have to carry the entire burden alone. If there was someone to share the evening routine, someone to fix the things that broke, someone to remind her that she was more than just Lucy's mother and the diner's most reliable waitress. She folded the schedule and put it away, but the questions it had raised lingered long after she turned off the lights. The neighborhood playground 3 blocks from Maple Street had seen better decades. The swing set leaned slightly to the left, the slide bore scratches from years of enthusiastic use, and the wooden borders around the sandbox had weathered to a soft gray. But on Saturday mornings, it transformed into a gathering place where the community's children claimed their territory with the same joyful intensity their parents had once brought to similar patches of worn grass and rusted equipment. David had suggested the playground outing with careful casualness, mentioning during Thursday evening's fence repair consultation that Sophia missed having other children to play with on weekends. Rachel had agreed with equal care, emphasizing that Lucy needed more social interaction with kids her own age. Neither adult acknowledged the obvious truth. They were looking for reasons to spend time together without the pressure of calling it a date. Sophia arrived that Saturday morning with a small backpack containing everything she deemed essential for playground success. A jump rope, a container of sidewalk chalk, 2 granola bars in case anyone gets hungry, and a first aid kit because playgrounds can be dangerous sometimes. Her preparation was thorough and endearing, the careful planning of a child who had learned that adventures went better when you thought ahead. Lucy met them at the playground entrance with her own preparations, a small notebook for recording important discoveries, a magnifying glass from a detective kit, and a pocket full of interesting rocks she'd collected throughout the week. The two girls compared their supplies with the seriousness of explorers planning an expedition to uncharted territory. "We should check all the equipment first," Sophia announced, assuming the role of older sister with natural authority. "Make sure everything is safe before we start playing." Rachel and David followed their daughters through the playground inspection, watching as the girls tested swings for stability, examined the slide for sharp edges, and declared the monkey bars probably okay, but we should be extra careful. Their thorough safety assessment was both practical and touching, evidence of children who had learned to take care of themselves and others. "They're good kids," David observed, as they settled on a bench that provided clear sightlines to all the playground equipment. "They are," Rachel agreed. "Sometimes I think Lucy is more responsible than I am. Sophia definitely keeps me organized. She makes lists of things that need fixing around the apartment, schedules our weekend activities, reminds me about library due dates." David's smile was warm with paternal pride. Her mother was like that always, thinking 3 steps ahead, making sure everyone was taken care of. It was the first time David had mentioned his wife without the careful distance he usually maintained around the subject. Rachel felt honored by the casual confidence, the way he'd shared the memory without seeming to weigh the emotional cost. "Lucy does the same thing," Rachel said. "She knows exactly how much money I have in my purse. Reminds me when bills are due. Tells me when I'm getting too tired to make good decisions. Sometimes I feel like she's raising me instead of the other way around." They watched their daughters attempt to organize a complex game that seemed to involve the slide, the swing set, and an elaborate point system based on successful completion of self-imposed challenges. The rules changed every few minutes as new possibilities occurred to them, but neither girl seemed concerned about consistency. "Can I ask you something?" David said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone approaching potentially sensitive territory. Rachel nodded, though her shoulders tensed slightly in preparation for whatever question might follow. "What happened with Lucy's father? I mean, you don't have to answer if it's too personal, but..." "It's not too personal, just disappointing." Rachel watched Lucy demonstrate her rock-climbing technique on the jungle gym, noting the way her daughter checked each handhold twice before trusting her weight to it. "He was charming when we were dating, talked about wanting a family, about being the kind of father he'd never had, but when Lucy was born, reality hit him pretty hard." David waited, giving her space to continue or change the subject as she preferred. "Babies are work," Rachel continued. "They're messy and loud and expensive, and they don't care if you're tired or stressed or not ready to be responsible for another human being. Mark, that's his name, he tried for about 18 months. But he was always looking for exits, always finding reasons why someone else should handle the difficult parts. And then he found a permanent exit. Rachel confirmed. Left a note saying he wasn't cut out for family life, that Lucy and I deserved better than what he could give us. Which was probably the most honest thing he'd ever said, but not exactly the kind of honesty that helps when you're left alone with a toddler and a pile of bills. Sophia's laughter carried across the playground as she and Lucy discovered that the swings could be used for an elaborate game involving synchronized pendulum motion. Their joy was infectious, drawing smiles from other parents and children nearby. "I'm sorry," David said quietly. "That must have been terrifying." It was, but also liberating, eventually. I stopped waiting for him to become the person I needed him to be and started figuring out how to be everything Lucy needed myself. It's exhausting, but at least it's reliable. David understood the sentiment more than Rachel realized. After Maria's death, he'd gone through a similar process of accepting that he would have to be both parents to Sophia, that waiting for help or rescue was less practical than learning to carry the full load alone. "What about you?" Rachel asked. "Do you ever think about, has there been anyone since?" "No," David said simply. "There have been women who expressed interest, but Sophia and we're a package deal, and most people aren't looking for that kind of instant responsibility." "Their loss," Rachel said, and meant it. They fell into comfortable silence, watching their daughters invent increasingly complex playground challenges. Other families had arrived, and the park was filling with the cheerful chaos of weekend recreation. But Rachel found herself aware mainly of David's presence beside her, the way his attention moved between their playing children and her face, the comfortable ease with which they'd settled into conversation. "Daddy," Sophia called from the top of the slide. "Watch this. Lucy taught me how to go down backwards." "That looks dangerous," David called back, but his tone was indulgent rather than worried. "Be careful." "We're always careful," Sophia replied, then promptly demonstrated a sliding technique that was neither careful nor conventional, but resulted in delighted laughter from both girls. "She's fearless," Rachel observed. "Too fearless sometimes. Maria used to say, Sophia got my stubbornness but her sense of adventure. Not always the safest combination. Lucy's the opposite. She thinks everything through 6 times before taking any risks. Sometimes I worry she's too cautious for her own good. Maybe they balance each other out." The comment hung between them, loaded with implications about more than just their daughter's playground dynamics. Rachel found herself imagining Lucy with an older sister to encourage her bravery, Sophia with a younger sister to help her think before leaping. The picture felt natural in a way that surprised her. "Mom," Lucy ran over, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Sophia says her daddy is going to teach us both how to ride bicycles without training wheels. Can we do that? Please?" Rachel looked at David, who shrugged with the resigned expression of a parent whose child had just made social commitments on his behalf. "If your mom thinks it's a good idea," David said, "but bicycle lessons are serious business. You have to promise to listen carefully and practice patience." "We promise," both girls chorused, already bouncing with anticipation. "I don't know," Rachel said slowly. "Bicycle riding is pretty advanced." "Please, Mommy," Lucy pleaded. "Sophia says her daddy taught her when she was my age, and she only fell down 3 times. I can handle falling down 3 times." David laughed. "It might be more than 3 times, Lucy. Learning to balance takes practice. But if you're willing to work hard and not give up when it gets difficult, I'd be happy to teach you both." The bicycle lessons were scheduled for the following weekend, but the conversation continued as they walked home from the playground. Sophia and Lucy skipped ahead, their friendship cementing with each shared discovery and successful challenge. Behind them, Rachel and David moved with the careful distance of adults who were beginning to realize their careful boundaries were shifting. "You don't have to teach her," Rachel said as they reached the corner where their paths would diverge. "Lucy can be pretty determined when she wants something, but I don't want you to feel obligated." "I want to," David interrupted gently. "Sophia's been asking for someone to practice with, and Lucy seems like she'd be a good student. Besides, it'll give us adults an excuse to spend more time together." The honesty in his words made Rachel's heart perform that familiar flutter. She looked at David, really looked at him, seeing past the careful neighbor relationship to the man who had just admitted he wanted to spend more time with her. "I'd like that," she said simply. And in that moment, standing on the corner of Maple Street, with their daughter's laughter echoing behind them, both adults acknowledged that whatever was growing between their families had moved beyond simple neighborly kindness into something that felt very much like the beginning of love. Sophia's school art project sat on the kitchen table like a small declaration of hope, its construction paper branches reaching across the page in careful brown crayon strokes. The assignment had been simple: create a family tree showing 3 generations of relatives. But Sophia's interpretation revealed the complexity of her 8-year-old heart. The main trunk bore the traditional branches for grandparents, parents, and children. But extending from her own small figure, drawn in purple crayon, was an additional branch reaching toward the edge of the paper. In careful block letters, Sophia had written, "Lucy, almost sister," and below that, connected by a dotted line that suggested tentative possibility, "Rachel, maybe Mom." David discovered the project when he arrived home from work Tuesday evening. tired from a day spent installing kitchen cabinets in a house that cost more than he'd earn in 5 years. Sophia was at the kitchen table working on homework, her tongue poking out in concentration as she practiced cursive letters. "What's this?" David asked, settling into the chair beside his daughter and studying the family tree with growing concern. "My family tree for Mrs. Patterson's class," Sophia said without looking up from her handwriting practice. "We have to present it tomorrow and explain all the people." David examined the artwork more carefully, noting the way Sophia had drawn Rachel's figure slightly larger than her own, positioned protectively between Sophia and Lucy's smaller form. The three female figures held hands in a chain of connection that somehow managed to include David's own figure without crowding him out of the picture. "Sophia, sweetheart, you can't tell your class that Rachel is your mother." Sophia's pencil paused mid-letter. "I didn't say she was my real mom. I said, maybe mom." "That's different. But it might confuse people. Rachel is our friend and neighbor, but she's not part of our family in the way this project is asking about." "Why not?" Sophia's voice carried the direct challenge that 8-year-old children wielded when adult logic failed to align with their understanding of the world. "We eat dinner together sometimes. She helps me with homework when you're working late. She knows how I like my sandwiches cut and that I'm scared of thunderstorms. That sounds like family to me." David felt his carefully constructed boundaries beginning to crumble under his daughter's relentless honesty. Over the past few weeks, the lines between neighbor and family had indeed become blurred. Rachel had picked Sophia up from school twice when construction delays kept him past pickup time. Sophia had spent Sunday afternoon at Rachel's apartment, helping Lucy bake cookies while Rachel taught her how to measure ingredients properly. "It's more complicated than that, Mija. Adults have to..." "Have to what?" Sophia set down her pencil and turned to face her father with the serious expression that always preceded her most difficult questions. "Have to wait for permission to care about people. Have to pretend they don't want things that would make everyone happy?" Before David could formulate an answer that would satisfy an 8-year-old's logic without encouraging false hopes, the phone rang. Sophia jumped up to answer it, her voice brightening immediately. "Hi, Lucy. Yes, I finished the math homework. Did you remember to study the spelling words?" Sophia paused, listening. "Oh no, that's terrible. Hold on. Let me ask my dad." Sophia covered the phone with her hand and turned to David with worried eyes. "Lucy's mom has to work a double shift tomorrow because someone called in sick. Lucy doesn't have anywhere to go after school, and she's scared about walking home alone." David knew what his daughter was asking without her having to spell it out. The elementary school had strict policies about child pickup, and 6-year-old Lucy couldn't be released to walk home unaccompanied. Rachel must be scrambling to find childcare, probably calculating whether she could afford to lose a day's wages to stay home with Lucy. "Tell Lucy she can come home with you tomorrow," David said, making the decision with his heart rather than his head. "I'll call the school and get Rachel added to your pickup list so she can collect Lucy when her shift ends." Sophia's smile could have powered the neighborhood. She relayed the message to Lucy with barely contained excitement, then hung up the phone and launched herself into David's arms with the force of a small hurricane. "Thank you, Daddy. You're the best dad in the whole world." As David held his daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling her complete trust in his ability to solve problems, he wondered when caring for Lucy Thompson had become as natural as caring for Sophia. When had Rachel's relief become as important to him as his own daughter's happiness? That evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, David found himself staring at the family tree project. His daughter's innocent addition of Rachel and Lucy to their family structure felt both presumptuous and perfectly logical. Children saw the world in simpler terms. People who cared for each other were family, regardless of legal documents or official ceremonies. The next morning brought the kind of chaos that tested every parent's organizational skills. Sophia couldn't find her favorite sweater. The coffee maker chose that morning to break down completely and David discovered he was out of milk for cereal, just as Sophia announced she absolutely had to have cereal for breakfast, or her entire day would be ruined. A knock at the door provided rescue in the form of Lucy Thompson, holding a small carton of milk and wearing the apologetic smile of someone who was about to ask for a significant favor. "I heard Sophia mention yesterday that you sometimes run out of milk," Rachel said, holding up the carton. "And I wanted to thank you again for watching Lucy today. I know it's a lot to ask." "It's not a lot to ask," David interrupted, accepting the milk with gratitude that went beyond the simple gesture. "Lucy's always welcome here. Sophia's been looking forward to it since last night. I brought Lucy's emergency contact information and her after-school snack," Rachel continued, pulling folded papers from her purse with the efficiency of a mother who had learned to plan for every contingency. "She's shy around new people sometimes, but she's been talking about spending the afternoon here for weeks." David studied Rachel's face, noting the shadows under her eyes that suggested another night of insufficient sleep. Working double shifts while raising a child alone required a level of stamina that amazed him. His own struggles with single parenthood seemed manageable in comparison to the juggling act Rachel performed daily. "How long is your shift today?" 14 hours, Rachel admitted. "I'll pick Lucy up around 9 tonight, if that's okay. I know it's late for a school night." "It's fine," David said firmly. "Lucy can have dinner with us and do homework at the kitchen table with Sophia. They can probably entertain each other better than I can entertain either of them individually." Relief flooded Rachel's expression. "You're sure? I can try to find someone else." "Rachel." David's voice carried gentle authority. "We're neighbors. We help each other. That's what people do." After Rachel left for work, David found himself managing the morning routine for 2 children instead of 1. Lucy arrived precisely at 7:30, carrying a small backpack and wearing the solemn expression of a child trying to be on her best behavior in someone else's house. "Thank you for letting me come over, Mr. Martinez," Lucy said, with the formal politeness her mother had obviously coached into her. "You can call me David," he replied, kneeling to her eye level. "And you don't have to thank me. Sophia's been planning activities for you all week." The walk to school revealed the depth of planning Sophia had indeed undertaken. She'd prepared a complete schedule for Lucy's afternoon visit, including homework time, snack preparation, and what she called important sister training activities. Lucy listened to these plans with the serious attention of someone receiving classified information. "What's sister training?" David asked, curious about his daughter's curriculum design. "I'm going to teach Lucy how to braid hair and how to make friendship bracelets, and how to tell when grown-ups are being silly about important things," Sophia explained with the confidence of someone who had obviously given this considerable thought. "What kind of important things? Like when they pretend they don't like each other when everyone can see that they do," Sophia said, with the devastating honesty that 8-year-old children wielded like precision instruments. David felt his cheeks warm as Lucy nodded sagely, as if Sophia had just explained a fundamental truth about adult behavior that she'd been wondering about herself. At pickup time, David collected both girls with the efficiency of someone who had been managing 2 children for years rather than hours. Lucy chatted about her day with the kind of detailed enthusiasm usually reserved for major life events, while Sophia basked in the glow of successful hostess duties. The afternoon at David's apartment unfolded with surprising smoothness. Both girls tackled homework with mutual support, Sophia helping Lucy with reading comprehension, while Lucy shared her superior knowledge of arithmetic. They prepared snacks together, negotiated television viewing choices with diplomatic maturity, and created an elaborate fort in the living room, using furniture and every available blanket. "Lucy's really good at making corners stay put," Sophia announced as they surveyed their architectural achievement. "And she knows how to make the blankets not fall down." "Sophia taught me the best way to arrange pillows for maximum comfort," Lucy replied, settling into their creation with satisfaction. "This is the best fort I've ever been in." David watched their collaboration with growing amazement. The two girls had developed a natural rhythm of give and take, each contributing strengths that complemented the other's abilities. Lucy's methodical approach balanced Sophia's creative enthusiasm, while Sophia's confidence encouraged Lucy to take small risks she might otherwise avoid. When dinner time arrived, David found himself cooking for three with the same ease he'd once reserved for family meals. Lucy set the table without being asked, arranging napkins with the careful precision of someone who took domestic responsibilities seriously. Sophia provided running commentary on David's cooking techniques, translating his methods for Lucy's benefit as if she were hosting her own cooking show. "Daddy always makes the rice first because it takes the longest," Sophia explained. "And he puts a little bit of oil in the water so it doesn't stick together. Lucy, did you know that's why restaurant rice tastes better than regular rice?" "I didn't know that," Lucy replied, filing away this information with the seriousness of someone building a comprehensive database of useful knowledge. "My mom usually makes rice from the box that has directions on the side." "Box rice is good too," David said diplomatically. "Different families have different ways of doing things. That's what makes visiting interesting." After dinner, the girls settled at the kitchen table with homework, while David tackled the dishes. Their quiet conversation provided a peaceful soundtrack, Lucy asking questions about long division, Sophia explaining her teacher's particular preferences for handwriting style, both of them discussing their plans for an upcoming school book fair, with the intensity of generals planning military strategy. "David," Lucy's voice was tentative, as if she were testing the boundaries of their newly established familiarity. "Yes, Lucy? Would it be okay if I drew a picture for you, to say thank you for letting me stay here today?" David turned from the sink, seeing the earnest hope in Lucy's expression. "I'd like that very much. What kind of picture?" "A picture of all of us," Lucy said, already reaching for the art supplies Sophia had arranged on the counter. "Like a family picture, but drawn instead of photographed." Sophia looked up from her homework with bright eyes. "Can I help? I'm really good at drawing hair, and Lucy's better at faces." "That sounds like a perfect collaboration," David agreed, though his heart performed that familiar flutter at Lucy's casual reference to all of us as family. As the girls worked on their artistic project, David finished the evening routine with a sense of completeness he hadn't experienced in years. Having Lucy in their home didn't feel like managing an extra child. It felt like their small family had simply expanded to include someone who had always belonged there. When Rachel arrived at 9 o'clock, she found both girls asleep on the living room floor, curled up in their blanket fort like puppies in a nest. The drawing they'd created together was spread between them, a colorful representation of 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a carefully detailed garden. "They've been planning this all week," David said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping children. "I think Lucy's appointment here was the highlight of Sophia's month." Rachel studied the drawing, noting the way the girls had positioned the 4 figures, 2 adults, 2 children, arranged not as separate families, but as a single unit. The house in the background featured details that belonged to both apartments, David's small garden patch and Rachel's yellow kitchen curtains. "She drew us as a family," Rachel whispered, her voice carrying wonder and something that might have been longing. "Children see things differently than adults do," David replied. "Sometimes I think they see things more clearly." As Rachel gently woke Lucy and gathered their belongings, David found himself reluctant to see them leave. The evening had felt natural in a way that surprised him, not like babysitting or helping out a neighbor, but like the kind of family routine he remembered from his marriage but thought he'd lost forever. "Thank you," Rachel said at the door, Lucy drowsy in her arms, "for everything. I know it was a lot." "It wasn't a lot," David interrupted gently. "It was wonderful. Lucy's welcome here any time." After they left, David cleaned up the art supplies and folded the blankets from the fort, but he left the drawing on the kitchen table next to Sophia's family tree project. 2 children's perspectives on what family could look like, both including people who weren't related by blood, but were connected by something equally powerful. As he turned off the lights and checked on Sophia, David realized that his daughter's school project might not be as presumptuous as he'd initially thought. Maybe the "maybe mom" designation was exactly the kind of honesty that adults needed to hear, even when it scared them, especially when it scared them. The broken fence between their properties had been an eyesore for months, its chain-link sections sagging and several posts leaning at angles that suggested eventual collapse. David had been meaning to address it since moving into the duplex, but the project had fallen victim to the endless list of more urgent repairs that consumed his weekend hours. Now, watching Sophia and Lucy play together in the shared yard space, the fence felt less like a boundary and more like an unnecessary obstacle. "I could fix that for both of us," David mentioned to Rachel on a Thursday evening as they supervised the girls' latest engineering project, an elaborate chalk obstacle course that wound between both yards. "Split the cost of materials, make the whole thing stable again." Rachel looked at the fence with the calculating expression of someone who had learned to weigh every expense against monthly budget constraints. "What would materials cost?" "Maybe $60 total. Concrete, a few replacement posts, new hardware for the gate latch." David kicked at one of the loose posts, noting how easily it shifted. "It's not safe like this. Someone's going to get hurt." $30 each, then." Rachel nodded, though David caught the slight hesitation that suggested even $30 required careful consideration. "When would you want to start?" "This Saturday, if the weather holds." Sophia's been asking to help with a big project, and Lucy seems to enjoy learning about tools and construction. The fence repair project began early Saturday morning, with both girls appointed as official assistants, complete with matching work gloves David had picked up at the hardware store. Sophia took her supervisory role seriously, explaining to Lucy the importance of safety glasses and proper tool handling, as if she were conducting a workplace orientation. "First rule," Sophia announced with the authority of someone who had clearly memorized her father's safety speeches, "is that we never use tools without asking permission. Second rule is that we always put tools back where they belong so nobody steps on them or loses them." Lucy nodded solemnly, accepting a small hammer that was obviously intended for lightweight tasks. "What's the third rule?" "Third rule is that if you don't know what something does, you ask before you touch it. Daddy says curiosity is good, but dangerous curiosity is different from safe curiosity." David and Rachel worked side by side, digging post holes and mixing concrete, while the girls sorted hardware and fetched supplies. The rhythm of shared labor felt natural in a way that surprised both adults, Rachel anticipating which tools David needed next. David automatically steadying posts, while Rachel adjusted their alignment. "You're good at this," David observed, as Rachel expertly leveled a fence post, using techniques she'd obviously learned elsewhere. "My dad was a contractor," Rachel explained, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her work glove. "I spent summers helping him with small jobs when I was Lucy's age. Haven't done it in years, but apparently it comes back." Sophia's lucky to have someone else who understands tools and construction. I was starting to worry. She'd grow up thinking I was the only person in the world who knew how to fix things. Rachel laughed, the sound carrying more lightness than David had heard from her in weeks. "Lucy thinks you're some kind of repair wizard. She's been practicing saying torque wrench and Phillips head screwdriver so she can impress you with her technical vocabulary." The morning progressed with the kind of easy collaboration that made complex tasks feel simple. Both girls proved surprisingly helpful, holding posts steady while the adults worked and providing cheerful commentary on their progress. When they broke for lunch, the four of them sat on David's back steps, sharing sandwiches and surveying their work, with the satisfaction of a team that had accomplished something meaningful together. "It looks so much better already," Lucy observed, swinging her legs from the step. "More like a real fence instead of a tired fence." "Tired fence?" David asked, charmed by her description. Like when Mummy comes home from work and needs to sit down for a while before she can do anything else." The fence was leaning over, like it needed a rest. Rachel's cheeks colored slightly at her daughter's astute observation of her evening routine, but David's expression held only understanding. "Everyone gets tired sometimes," David said gently. "Moms and dads and fences. The important thing is taking care of each other so everybody gets the rest they need." After lunch, their work was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A man in his early 30s approached the yard with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, though David had never seen him before. Rachel's face went pale as she recognized him, her hand automatically reaching for Lucy's shoulder in a protective gesture. "Mark," Rachel said, her voice carefully neutral, "what are you doing here?" "Hello, Rachel." Lucy. Mark Thompson studied the domestic scene with obvious surprise, the fence repair project, the work gloves, the easy familiarity between two families sharing a Saturday morning project. "I probably should have called first." Lucy moved closer to Rachel, her earlier confidence replaced by the wary uncertainty of a child confronting someone who was supposed to be familiar but felt like a stranger. David straightened from his work, his instincts immediately alert to the tension that had invaded their peaceful morning. "Lucy, sweetheart, you remember your father, don't you?" Rachel's voice carried forced brightness that didn't quite mask her discomfort. "Hi," Lucy said quietly, pressing against her mother's side with the body language of someone seeking protection. Mark crouched down to Lucy's eye level with the awkward movements of an adult who wasn't sure how to interact with children. "You've gotten so big, kiddo. I've missed you." Lucy studied her father with the direct assessment children used when deciding whether adults could be trusted. "Where have you been?" The simple question hung in the air with devastating honesty. Mark's confident expression faltered as he struggled to find an answer that would satisfy a 6-year-old's logic without revealing the complexity of his own failures. "I've been working far away," Mark said finally. "But I'm back now. And I was hoping we could spend some time together. Maybe I could take you for ice cream. Just the two of us." Lucy looked up at Rachel, then at David and Sophia, before returning her attention to her father. "I don't want to go for ice cream. I want to finish fixing the fence. We're almost done, and David said I could help paint the gate when the concrete is dry." David felt the weight of being caught in the middle of a family situation that had nothing to do with him, but everything to do with people he'd come to care about deeply. Mark's presence shifted the dynamic of their small group, introducing complications and questions that threatened the stability they'd been building. "Lucy," Rachel said gently, "your father drove a long way to see you. Maybe we could finish the fence another time." "No," Lucy said with the stubborn determination that was usually reserved for bedtime negotiations. "I want to stay here. David needs my help, and Sophia and I are a team." Sophia, who had been watching the adult interaction with the careful attention of a child who sensed important undercurrents, stepped closer to Lucy in a gesture of silent support. Mark's expression tightened with frustration. "Rachel, could I talk to you privately for a minute?" David began gathering tools, recognizing the need to give the family space to navigate their complicated reunion. "Sophia, let's go inside and let Lucy visit with her father." "But we're not finished with the fence," Sophia protested, her 8-year-old sense of justice offended by the interruption of their project. "The fence will wait," David said firmly, though his eyes met Rachel's with a silent message of support. "We can finish it later." As David and Sophia retreated to their apartment, David found himself in the unexpected position of managing his daughter's disappointment while wrestling with his own complicated feelings about Mark Thompson's return. The man had every right to visit his daughter, but the timing felt intrusive, disrupting the careful balance the four of them had established. "Why did Lucy's dad make her sad?" Sophia asked, settling at the kitchen table with the directness of someone who expected honest answers from adults. "It's complicated, Mija. Sometimes when people go away for a long time, it takes time for everyone to remember how to be comfortable together again. But Lucy was happy before he came, and now she's not happy. That seems like going backwards instead of forwards." David had no adequate response to his daughter's logic. From Sophia's perspective, the equation was simple. Lucy had been content and secure in their shared routine, and Mark's arrival had disrupted that contentment without offering anything better in return. Through the kitchen window, David could see Rachel and Mark engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation, while Lucy sat on the back steps with the defeated posture of a child who had become the subject of adult negotiations rather than a participant in them. Are we still going to be friends with Lucy and Rachel? Sophia asked, her voice carrying the worry of someone who had learned that adult relationships could change without warning. Yes, David said firmly, making a decision that had more to do with his heart than his head. We're still going to be friends with them. No matter what happens with Lucy's father, that doesn't change how we feel about Lucy and Rachel. Sophia nodded, satisfied with this assurance, but David found himself staring out the window and wondering if Mark Thompson's return would force Rachel to choose between the stability they'd been building and the legal obligations of co-parenting with a man who had already proven himself unreliable. The fence repair project remained unfinished that afternoon, its concrete posts set, but its symbolic significance hanging in the balance. The barrier between their families had been partially removed, but new obstacles had appeared that might prove more difficult to overcome than rusted chain link and loose hardware. As evening approached and Mark finally left without Lucy, whose refusal to accompany him had been absolute and unwavering, David found himself hoping that some fences, once you began removing them, became impossible to rebuild. The medical bill arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between grocery store circulars and credit card offers like a landmine disguised as routine mail. David had been expecting it. The collection agency had been calling for weeks, but seeing the amount printed in stark black numbers still felt like a physical blow. $37,418. Final notice. Payment required within 30 days, or the account would be forwarded to legal proceedings. David folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others in the shoebox under his bed, but this time the ritual felt different. Final notice meant exactly that: no more payment plans, no more negotiations, no more hoping that time would somehow solve the problem. Maria's cancer treatment had saved her life for an additional 18 months, but the cost of those months was about to destroy the life he'd built for Sophia. The job offer had come the day before, delivered by phone, while Sophia was at school and the house was quiet enough for serious conversations. A construction foreman position in Denver, Colorado. $65,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a signing bonus that would cover moving expenses and then some. The kind of opportunity that appeared once in a lifetime for someone with David's background and experience. The job's yours if you want it, the recruiter had said. We need someone who can start within 6 weeks. I know it's quick, but the housing market in Denver is favorable right now, and the schools are excellent. Good place to raise a family. David had asked for time to consider the offer, but in his heart, he knew there was no real choice to be made. The Denver salary would allow him to pay off Maria's medical debt within 2 years instead of 20. Sophia could have the kind of educational opportunities that weren't available in their current neighborhood. They could start fresh in a place where financial stress wasn't a constant shadow over every decision. But starting fresh meant leaving Rachel and Lucy behind, just as their 4 lives had begun weaving together into something that felt like family. Sophia found him that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the medical bill spread before him, his laptop open to apartment listings in Denver neighborhoods. She approached with the careful steps of a child who had learned to read her father's moods through small signals, the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head when worrying about money. "Are we moving away?" Sophia asked, settling into the chair beside him and studying the computer screen with the serious attention of someone who understood that her entire world might be about to change. David had planned to wait, to find the right time and words to explain the situation without causing unnecessary anxiety. But Sophia's direct question deserved an honest answer. "Maybe," he said quietly. "I got offered a job in Colorado. It pays a lot more money than what I make here." "Because of Mummy's hospital bills?" The question struck David like a physical blow. He'd thought he'd been successful in shielding Sophia from the financial pressures that haunted their daily life. But his 8-year-old daughter had apparently been paying closer attention than he'd realized. "How do you know about hospital bills? I heard you talking to the phone people sometimes when you think I'm asleep. And I saw some of the letters when they fall out of your jacket pocket." Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held the kind of understanding that children shouldn't have to carry. "The hospital people want money we don't have, and that's why you work so many extra hours, and why we eat spaghetti so much, and why you always say no when I ask for things at the store." David felt his carefully constructed defenses crumble under his daughter's relentless honesty. He'd spent 3 years trying to protect her from the reality of their financial situation, but Sophia had absorbed it anyway through the 1,000 small economies and sacrifices that shaped their daily routine. "The Denver job would pay enough to solve those problems," David said carefully. "We could have a bigger apartment, and you could take music lessons or art classes if you wanted. There would be money for the things we can't afford now." Sophia studied the computer screen, scrolling through photos of apartments with modern appliances and spacious bedrooms. The images represented possibilities that their current life couldn't offer: security, comfort, freedom from the constant calculation of expenses. "But we would have to leave Rachel and Lucy," Sophia said, her voice small. "Yes, we would have to leave them." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing information that was too complex for her age, but unavoidable given their circumstances. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of someone who had learned that loving people sometimes meant making difficult choices. "Do we have to decide right now?" "Soon. The job starts in 6 weeks. And if we don't take the job?" David hesitated, unwilling to burden his daughter with the full weight of their financial crisis, but unable to lie about their limited options. "Then we keep trying to make things work here, but it would be harder." Sophia nodded with the grave acceptance of a child who had never been allowed the luxury of believing that adults could solve every problem. She reached across the table and touched the medical bill with one small finger, as if she could make the numbers disappear through sheer force of will. "I don't want to leave Lucy and Rachel," she said quietly. "They're our family now." "I know, Misha. I don't want to leave them either. But you think we have to." David looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing past the 8-year-old exterior to the resilient, thoughtful person she was becoming despite their circumstances. Sophia had inherited her mother's strength and her father's practical nature, but she'd also developed something uniquely her own: the ability to love people completely while understanding that love sometimes required sacrifice. "I think we might have to," David admitted, the words feeling like surrender. The next morning, David called the Denver recruiter and asked for another week to make his final decision. Then he drove to the bank and met with a loan officer who reviewed his financial situation with the detached professionalism of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "With your current income and debt obligations, we can't extend additional credit," the officer explained, sliding David's documents back across the desk. "The medical debt represents too significant a liability for unsecured lending." David had expected the rejection, but hearing it confirmed still felt like watching a door close on his last hope of staying in town. The Denver job wasn't just an opportunity anymore, it was the only viable solution to their financial crisis. At lunchtime, he found himself at Mel's diner, seeking the comfort of Rachel's presence, even though he couldn't bring himself to tell her about the job offer. She moved through her shift with the efficient grace he'd come to admire, managing difficult customers and complex orders while maintaining the kind of warm professionalism that earned good tips and repeat business. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Rachel observed, sliding into the booth across from him during her break. "Everything okay?" David wanted to tell her everything about the medical bills, the job offer, the impossible choice between financial security and the family they'd been building together. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped between his need for honesty and his fear of burdening her with problems she couldn't solve. Just work stress, he said finally. Construction projects and deadlines. Rachel studied his face with the intuitive understanding of someone who had learned to read distress in others' expressions. If you need to talk about anything, I mean anything at all, you know, I'm here, right? The kindness in her voice nearly broke his resolve. David reached across the table and took her hand, memorizing the warmth of her skin and the way her fingers curved to fit against his palm. I know, he said quietly, and that means more than you realize. That evening, Sophia approached the problem with the methodical determination she'd inherited from both parents. She spread her school supplies across the kitchen table and began writing what appeared to be a very serious letter, consulting a dictionary for proper spelling and crossing out words that didn't meet her standards. "What are you working on?" David asked, settling beside her to help with dinner preparation. "A letter to the hospital people," Sophia replied, without looking up from her careful printing. "I'm going to explain that we need more time to pay them back and that we're good people who just had bad luck with being sick." David's heart clenched as he watched his 8-year-old daughter attempt to negotiate with creditors through pure honesty and appeal to human decency. The letter was touching in its innocence and heartbreaking in its futility, but he didn't have the heart to explain why billing departments couldn't be swayed by a child's logic. "That's very thoughtful, Mija, but hospital bills are complicated, and I know they're complicated," Sophia interrupted with unusual sharpness. "But maybe they're complicated because nobody ever explains to the hospital people that behind every bill is a real family with real feelings. Maybe if they understood that paying them means we can't stay near the people we love, they would find a different solution." Sophia's words hung in the air like a challenge to every assumption David had made about their situation. His daughter was suggesting that honesty might be more powerful than he'd given it credit for, that the community connections they'd built might matter more than the financial calculations that dominated his thinking. But even as Sophia wrote her letter with careful determination, David knew that good intentions couldn't overcome the reality of legal obligations and collection proceedings. The medical debt was a fact that couldn't be wished away, and the Denver job offer represented their only realistic escape from financial catastrophe. The choice was becoming clearer, even as it became more painful. Within a week, David would have to choose between the family he was building with Rachel and Lucy and the financial security that Sophia deserved. The most heartbreaking part was that both choices came from love. Love for his daughter's future, love for the woman who had brought joy back into their lives, love for the little girl who had become like a second daughter to him. As Sophia sealed her letter in an envelope addressed to the hospital people, important department, David wondered if there was any force in the world powerful enough to overcome the simple mathematics of debt and necessity. The medical bill in his shoebox represented more than money. It represented the difference between staying and leaving, between the family they were becoming and the family they would have to abandon. For the first time since Maria's death, David found himself wishing that love alone could solve every problem, that caring for people could somehow translate into the kind of practical solutions that banks and creditors would accept. But the Denver job offer sat on his kitchen table like a ticking clock, counting down the days until he would have to choose between his heart and his daughter's future. The mason jar appeared on the counter at Mel's diner on a Wednesday morning, hand-labeled with Rachel's careful script. "Help a Neighbor Fund." Diane had suggested it after Rachel finally broke down and told her about David's situation. The words tumbling out between coffee refills and breakfast orders, like a dam finally giving way to overwhelming pressure. "That man has been fixing half this neighborhood's problems for 2 years, Diane had said, with the firm conviction of someone who had witnessed David's quiet generosity firsthand. Now, it's time for the neighborhood to fix one of his problems. Rachel had discovered David's financial crisis by accident, overhearing Sophia's tearful phone conversation with Lucy about having to move to Colorado. The little girl's explanation had been heartbreakingly direct. "Daddy says we have to go where he can make enough money to pay the doctors for helping my mummy before she died." The revelation had hit Rachel like a physical blow. For weeks, she'd been wondering why David seemed distracted, why his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes, why he'd been working longer hours and declining invitations for family dinners. The medical debt explained everything: his careful budgeting, Sophia's mature understanding of financial limitations, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with construction work. Rachel had spent that night staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating her own limited resources, trying to find a way to help that wouldn't feel like charity to a man who had too much pride to accept handouts. The diner fund jar was Diane's solution: community support disguised as neighborhood appreciation, allowing David to maintain his dignity while receiving the help he desperately needed. The first contribution came from Mel himself, the diner's owner, stuffing a $20 bill into the jar with gruff affection. "That Martinez fellow fixed my freezer door last month when the repair guy wanted $200 for a 10-minute job. Least I can do is return the favor." Word spread through the informal network of Maple Street residents with the efficiency of small-town communication. Mrs. Rodriguez contributed her weekly grocery money after Rachel explained the situation in careful, respectful terms. The Johnson family emptied their children's piggy banks and matched the amount from their own savings. Mr. Patterson, the elderly widower whose front steps David had repaired, walked 3 blocks to the diner just to contribute his Social Security coffee money. "These are for the Martinez family," each contributor said, as if Rachel were simply the collection point rather than the organizer of their generosity. But the most significant contributor was someone Rachel hadn't expected. Sophia and Lucy appeared at the diner after school, clutching a coffee can that rattled with the weight of accumulated coins and small bills. "This is our combined allowance money," Sophia announced, with the serious dignity of someone conducting important business. "Plus the money Lucy's been saving for a new bike, and the money I was saving for art supplies. We want to help Daddy pay the hospital people so we don't have to move away." Rachel knelt to the girls' eye level, overwhelmed by their selflessness and the matter-of-fact way they decided to sacrifice their own desires for their family's stability. "Sweethearts, you don't need to give up your savings." "Yes, we do," Lucy interrupted with unusual firmness. "David is part of our family now, and families help each other with big problems." Sophia explained about how the hospital people need money for helping her mummy, and that's important, even if it makes things hard now. "Besides," Sophia added, "art supplies and bikes are nice things, but staying together is a need thing. Need things are more important than nice things." The wisdom in the 8-year-old's words made Rachel's throat tight with emotion. Sophia had learned to distinguish between wants and needs through hard experience, but instead of making her bitter, it had made her generous in ways that shamed most adults. By Thursday evening, the mason jar had been joined by a second container, then a third. Rachel recruited Diane's contacts at other local businesses, and the fundraising effort spread beyond the immediate neighborhood. The hardware store where David bought supplies contributed gift certificates for building materials. The elementary school's parent association, after learning about Sophia's family situation, organized a bake sale specifically for the Help a Neighbor Fund. David's construction crew, when word reached the job site, took up an immediate collection that raised more money in one afternoon than most of them made in overtime wages. Mike Sullivan, the crew foreman, presented the contribution with the rough affection of men who expressed emotion through actions rather than words. "Martinez, you've been covering for guys when they needed time off, fixing their trucks when they broke down, never asking for anything back," Mike said, pressing the envelope into David's hands despite his protests. "This ain't charity. This is investment in keeping good people in the neighborhood." David's attempts to decline the money were met with stubborn resistance from every quarter. When he tried to return Mrs. Rodriguez's contribution, she threatened to stop speaking to him entirely. When he approached Mel about the diner's donation, the older man simply turned up his hearing aid and pretended not to understand the conversation. "You're missing the point," Rachel told him Friday evening, as they sat on his back porch, watching Sophia and Lucy practice their newly acquired fence painting skills. This isn't about you being unable to handle your problems. This is about people who care about you, wanting to solve a problem together. I can't accept this much money from friends and neighbors, David insisted, though his voice lacked the conviction his words suggested. It's too much, and I have no way to pay it back. You've already paid it back, Rachel said firmly. Every time you fixed someone's faucet, every time you helped carry groceries for elderly neighbors, every time you taught kids how to change bicycle tires, you were building up credit in the community bank. Now people want to make a withdrawal on your behalf. Sophia looked up from her careful application of white paint to the fence gate, her face serious with 8-year-old logic. Daddy, remember what you told me about accepting help? That sometimes letting people help you is a way of helping them feel good about being kind? David had indeed told his daughter exactly that, during one of her stubborn phases, when she'd refused assistance with difficult homework. The lesson, delivered back to him by his own child, felt like gentle wisdom from the universe. But even as the community support grew beyond anything David could have imagined, the practical deadline remained unchanged. The Denver job offer required a response by Monday morning. The medical debt, despite the generous contributions, still represented an amount that would take years to accumulate through neighborhood fundraising. The mathematics of their situation hadn't fundamentally changed, even though the emotional support had transformed David's understanding of what community meant. Rachel had spent the week organizing the fundraising efforts with the efficiency of someone who had finally found a problem she could actively solve. But Friday night, alone in her apartment after Lucy had fallen asleep, she allowed herself to confront the reality that their efforts might not be enough to keep David and Sophia in town. The possibility of losing them felt like losing family members she'd only just discovered. Sophia had become the older sister Lucy had always wanted, patient and protective in ways that made Rachel's heart ache with gratitude. David had become something she hadn't dared to hope for, a partner who shared responsibility instead of creating it, who made her laugh instead of worry, who treated Lucy with the same gentle attention he gave his own daughter. But more than that, David had helped Rachel remember who she was, beyond her roles as mother and provider. In his presence, she felt like the woman she'd been before divorce and financial stress had worn away her confidence in her own worth. With David, she could imagine a future that included personal happiness alongside parental responsibility. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the diner. Mark Thompson appeared during the breakfast rush, his expression carrying the determined confidence of someone who had decided to insert himself back into his daughter's life, regardless of timing or welcome. "I want to talk about custody arrangements," Mark announced, without preamble, settling into a booth during Rachel's busiest hour. "Lucy should be spending weekends with me, getting to know her father again." Rachel felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack under the pressure of managing multiple crises simultaneously. The fundraising effort for David's family had consumed all her emotional energy, and Mark's sudden interest in active parenting felt like being attacked from a second front. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation," Rachel said, refilling his coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "I'm working, and you can't just show up and make demands." "I'm not making demands. I'm asserting my rights as Lucy's father." Mark's voice carried the legal authority of someone who had obviously consulted with lawyers about his position. "I've been thinking about our family situation, and I want to be more involved in Lucy's life." The timing of Mark's renewed paternal interest felt suspiciously coincidental with David's potential departure from town. Rachel wondered if her ex-husband had somehow learned about the community fundraising efforts, if he saw an opportunity to reclaim his family just as they might be losing the man who had shown them what stability looked like. Diane, witnessing the conversation from behind the counter, approached with the protective instincts of someone who had watched Rachel rebuild her life from the ground up. Mark Thompson, if you want to discuss parenting arrangements, you can make an appointment like a civilized person, instead of cornering Rachel during work hours, Diane said with the kind of maternal authority that brooked no argument. Right now, you're disrupting her ability to earn the money that's been supporting your daughter for the past 18 months. Mark's confident expression faltered under Diane's direct challenge, but he recovered quickly. I understand, emotions are running high, but I have every right to see my daughter and discuss our future arrangements. Your future arrangements, Rachel repeated, her voice sharp with the stress of too many impossible situations converging at once. Where have these arrangements been for the past year and a half? Where were your rights when Lucy needed someone to take her to doctor appointments and parent-teacher conferences? The diner had grown quiet, other customers sensing the tension and beginning to pay attention to what was clearly a family conflict playing out in public. Rachel felt exposed and vulnerable, her private struggles becoming entertainment for strangers. "People change," Mark said, his voice taking on the persuasive tone that had once convinced her to trust him. "I've had time to think about what's important, and I want to be part of Lucy's life again. A real part, not just weekend visits and holiday cards." "And what exactly does that mean?" Rachel asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It means I want us to try again, as a family. Lucy needs her father, and you need someone who can provide stability without depending on charity from neighbors." The reference to the community fundraising efforts hit Rachel like a slap. Mark had indeed learned about their efforts to help David, and he was using that knowledge to position himself as a superior alternative, a man who could solve Rachel's problems without requiring community support. Rachel looked around the diner, seeing the concerned faces of people who had become her extended family over the past few years. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in her usual corner booth, her weekly grocery money contributed to David's fund. Mel worked behind the grill, his rough kindness evident in his handling of the breakfast rush. Diane stood ready to defend Rachel's right to choose her own path forward. These people had supported her through divorce, helped her find work, celebrated Lucy's milestones, and now rallied around David's family as if they were all part of one large, complicated, generous household. The contrast between their steady presence and Mark's opportunistic timing could not have been starker. "I need to think about this," Rachel said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "This is a lot to process all at once." "Of course," Mark agreed, his confidence returning as he interpreted her words as potential agreement. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Lucy deserves to have both her parents in her life, and you deserve to have someone who can take care of you both properly." After Mark left, Rachel stood in the diner's storage room and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of private breakdown. 3 minutes to cry for the complexity of loving people, for the impossibility of perfect timing, for the way life seemed determined to force impossible choices just when happiness seemed within reach. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her uniform, and returned to work. Because, regardless of what decisions lay ahead, she still had tables to serve, bills to pay, and a daughter who needed her to be strong enough to choose wisely rather than quickly. The weekend stretched ahead with all the weight of decisions that would determine the shape of multiple families' futures. David's deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon, while Mark's reappearance added new complications to an already impossible equation. But in the diner's mason jar, the contributions continued to accumulate evidence that love, while not always enough to solve every problem, was powerful enough to inspire ordinary people to attempt extraordinary generosity. Whether that would prove sufficient to change the trajectory of their intertwined lives remained to be seen, but the effort itself had already transformed their understanding of what community could mean when people decided to care for each other without conditions or expectations of return. Monday morning arrived with the weight of finality, the Denver job deadline looming like a countdown clock that had reached its final hours. David sat at his kitchen table with his phone in one hand and the accumulated fundraising money spread before him, bills and checks and coins that represented his neighbor's faith in his worth, but fell short of the amount needed to solve his medical debt crisis completely. The moving truck was scheduled to arrive at noon. David had called the rental company the previous evening, his voice hollow as he confirmed the reservation he'd hoped he wouldn't need. Sophia sat across from him, her small face set with the kind of determined acceptance that broke his heart more than tears would have. "We have to call them today, don't we, Daddy?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone she used when discussing difficult truths. "Yes, Mija, we have to call them today." But before David could dial the recruiter's number, Lucy Thompson burst through their back door with the kind of entrance that ignored conventional boundaries in favor of urgent family business. She clutched a candy ring pop in one small fist and wore the expression of someone who had arrived to prevent a catastrophe through sheer force of will. "Stop!" Lucy announced, positioning herself between David and his phone with the dramatic flair of a tiny superhero. "You can't call the job people until I fix this." Sophia looked up from her cereal with the patient curiosity of someone accustomed to Lucy's creative problem-solving approaches. "Fix what, Lucy?" "The grown-up problem." Lucy held up the ring pop with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence in a critical legal case. "I figured out what's wrong. You and Rachel love each other, but you're both too scared to say it, and now David's going to move away because grown-ups make everything complicated when it should be simple." David felt his heart perform that familiar flutter at Lucy's casual mention of love, even as he recognized the impossibility of her 6-year-old solution to their adult problems. "Lucy, sweetie, it's more complicated than—" "No, it's not," Lucy interrupted with the absolute certainty of childhood logic. "Sophia explained about the hospital money, and I know that's a big problem, but moving away won't make anyone happy. It'll just make everyone sad in different places." Sophia nodded sagely, as if Lucy had just articulated something she'd been thinking but couldn't express. "Lucy's right, Daddy. The money problem is one problem. But leaving Rachel and Lucy would create 4 new problems, one for each of us being sad and missing each other." Before David could respond to his daughter's devastating mathematics, Rachel appeared in the doorway with the slightly frantic expression of someone who had been chasing a 6-year-old through the neighborhood. Her work uniform was disheveled, her hair escaping its ponytail, but her eyes held the same desperate determination that radiated from Lucy's small frame. "Lucy Elizabeth Thompson, you cannot just run out of the house while I'm getting ready for work," Rachel began, then stopped as she took in the scene. David with his phone, Sophia with her cereal, Lucy with her ring pop, positioned like a weapon against adult foolishness. "I had to stop them from calling the job people," Lucy explained, as if this were the most logical emergency response in the world. "And I brought this." She held up the ring pop with renewed enthusiasm. "It's a wedding ring, kind of. And I'm going to marry you and David right now, so you can't move away, because married people stay together and solve problems as a team." The silence that followed Lucy's announcement was so complete that the distant sound of morning traffic seemed to fade into background whisper. David stared at the candy ring. Rachel stared at her daughter, and Sophia stared at all of them with the expression of someone watching a drama unfold, whose ending might determine her entire future. "Lucy," Rachel said carefully, "you can't just marry people with candy rings. Marriage is a legal process that requires—" "I don't care about legal stuff," Lucy interrupted, her voice rising with the passion of someone who had clearly given this considerable thought. "I care about family stuff. You make David happy, and he makes you happy. And Sophia and I are already sisters in everything except the official way. The only thing missing is the ceremony." David found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Lucy, even if your mother and I wanted to get married, which is a very big decision that adults have to think about carefully, it wouldn't solve the money problem. I'd still owe the hospital, and I'd still need to find a way to pay them back. But you wouldn't have to solve it alone," Sophia chimed in, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through adult complications with surgical precision. Rachel has a job too, and together you'd have more money than separately. And Lucy and I could help by being extra good and not asking for expensive things. Lucy nodded vigorously. And if you're married, then the neighborhood people's money isn't charity anymore. It's wedding gifts. Diane explained that wedding gifts are different from charity because they're celebrating something happy instead of fixing something sad. Rachel and David looked at each other across the kitchen, seeing their own longing reflected in each other's eyes. The children's logic was simultaneously flawed, and profound marriage couldn't magically solve financial problems, but it could transform the nature of community support from charity to celebration. Lucy, Rachel said gently, kneeling to her daughter's eye level, marriage is about more than solving problems together. People get married because they love each other and want to build a life together. So, do you love each other or not? Lucy asked, with the directness that only children could achieve. Because if you do, then the rest is just details that grown-ups like to make complicated. David stood up from the table, his phone forgotten as he looked at Rachel. Really looked at her, seeing past the exhausted single mother to the woman who had brought joy back into his life, who had shown Sophia what maternal love looked like, who had made their small family feel complete in ways he hadn't dared to hope for. "I do love you," David said quietly, the words carrying the weight of months of unspoken feelings. "I love you, and I love Lucy, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that without making our situation more complicated than it already is." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as 3 years of careful emotional protection crumbled under the force of honest confession. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love you and Sophia, and I've been terrified that admitting it would somehow jinx whatever we've been building together." "Finally!" Lucy shouted, throwing her hands in the air with the triumph of someone whose persistence had finally paid off. "Now we can have the wedding ceremony and fix everything at once." Sophia clapped her hands together with delight. "Lucy, you're a genius. This is the best solution ever." Lucy approached David with the ring pop held out like an offering. "Will you marry my mommy so we can all be a real family and stay together forever?" David took the candy ring, its plastic gem catching the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. The gesture was absurd and profound, a 6-year-old solution to adult problems that somehow cut through every rational objection to reach the emotional truth at the center of their situation. "Rachel," David said, holding up the ring pop with mock solemnity, "will you marry me? Not because it solves our problems, but because I can't imagine solving any problem without you. Because Sophia needs a mother who understands her, and Lucy needs a father who will show up and stay. Because we're already a family in every way that matters. And maybe it's time to make it official." Rachel laughed through her tears, the sound carrying more joy than David had heard from her since they'd first met. "David Martinez, that is the most ridiculous and perfect proposal I've ever heard. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you with a candy ring in front of our daughters, because they're right. Sometimes the simple answer is the right answer, even when grown-ups want to make it complicated." Lucy performed a victory dance that involved spinning in circles and singing what appeared to be an improvised wedding march. Sophia joined her, and within moments, both girls were singing and dancing around the kitchen table with the unrestrained joy of children who had just witnessed their greatest wish come true. David slipped the candy ring onto Rachel's finger, both of them laughing at the absurdity and rightness of the moment. The ring was too large and sticky with sugar, but it represented something more valuable than any diamond, the promise that love could indeed conquer practical problems when people were brave enough to choose each other over fear. The phone call to the Denver recruiter was the easiest difficult conversation David had ever had. "I appreciate the opportunity," he said, watching through the kitchen window as Sophia and Lucy used sidewalk chalk to create an elaborate hopscotch course that apparently required complex mathematical calculations, "but I've decided to stay where I am. My family is here." The recruiter expressed polite disappointment and wished David well, unaware that his decision had been influenced by a 6-year-old with a candy ring and the kind of logical certainty that adults spent years learning to doubt. Rachel called Mel's diner to request the day off, explaining the situation with barely contained excitement. "I'm getting married today," she announced to Diane, who responded with a whoop of joy that could probably be heard in the kitchen. "It's about damn time," Diane declared. "I've been waiting for you two to figure out what everyone else could see from day one. Do you need help planning anything? Because I've got opinions about proper wedding celebrations." The impromptu wedding planning session that followed was unlike anything either David or Rachel had imagined for their eventual nuptials. Sophia and Lucy appointed themselves co-wedding planners, approaching the task with the same serious dedication they'd brought to fence repair and bicycle maintenance. "We need flowers," Sophia announced, consulting a list she'd apparently been compiling in her head. "And music, and food for the guests, and something special for everyone to wear. And cake," Lucy added. "You can't have a wedding without cake. It's probably illegal. The flowers we can pick from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden," Sophia continued, warming to her organizational role. "She told me once that I could pick flowers any time I wanted, and weddings are definitely a special occasion." Lucy nodded approvingly. "And for music, we can use my karaoke machine from Christmas. It has a microphone and everything." The guest list, according to the girls, should include everyone who helped with the money jar, which meant the entire neighborhood would need to be invited to a wedding that was being planned 4 hours before it was scheduled to take place. David and Rachel exchanged glances, realizing that their candy ring engagement had somehow evolved into a full-scale community celebration. The prospect should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt perfectly appropriate. Their love story had been witnessed and supported by these neighbors from the beginning, so including them in the wedding felt natural rather than burdensome. "We should probably make this legal," Rachel pointed out with practical concern. "Marriage licenses and official ceremonies and all that." "Courthouse is open until 4, David replied, already reaching for his keys. "We can get the license, find someone to perform the ceremony, and be back here for the neighborhood reception by evening." Sophia clapped her hands together. "Can Lucy and I come to the courthouse too? We want to see the official part." "Wouldn't be a family wedding without our daughters," Rachel agreed, though the word daughters made her voice catch with emotion. In the space of one morning, Lucy had gained a father, and Sophia had gained a mother, and Rachel had gained a family larger than she dared to dream possible. The courthouse wedding was simple and perfect, witnessed by a kind clerk who seemed charmed by the girls' barely contained excitement and the obvious joy radiating from both adults. David wore his best work shirt and clean jeans. Rachel wore a yellow sundress that made her eyes sparkle, and both girls wore their Sunday best clothes with flowers from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden tucked behind their ears. "Do you, David Martinez, take Rachel Thompson to be your wife, in good times and bad, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health?" The justice of the peace asked with the practiced solemnity of someone who had witnessed countless unions. "I do," David said, his voice steady and sure. "I absolutely do. And do you, Rachel Thompson, take David Martinez to be your husband, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges life brings?" "I do," Rachel replied, looking into David's eyes and seeing their future reflected there, not perfect or easy, but full of the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure rather than weaker. Sophia and Lucy applauded when their parents kissed, the sound echoing in the courthouse hallway like a celebration of possibility. The candy ring had been replaced by simple gold bands purchased from a jewelry store that stayed open late for exactly these kinds of romantic emergencies, but Lucy insisted on keeping the ring pop as evidence of her successful matchmaking efforts. By the time they returned to Maple Street, word of the wedding had spread through the neighborhood with remarkable efficiency. Mrs. Rodriguez had contributed fresh flowers from her entire garden, transforming David's backyard into something that looked intentionally decorated rather than hastily assembled. The Johnson family had strung lights between the trees, creating an atmosphere of festive celebration. Mr. Patterson had contributed a card table covered with his best tablecloth, which now held a collection of potluck dishes that represented the neighborhood's entire culinary repertoire. Diane arrived with a 3-layer cake from the bakery near the diner, claiming she'd had it specially ordered for this exact occasion. Though David suspected she'd convinced the baker to sell her a display model on extremely short notice. "I knew this day would come eventually," Diane announced, hugging Rachel with the fierce affection of someone who had watched her rebuild her life from the ground up. "I just didn't expect it to happen quite so fast." The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding reception either David or Rachel had ever attended. Children ran between the adults, music played from Lucy's karaoke machine, and the entire neighborhood seemed to have decided that this marriage was a community victory, worth celebrating with enthusiasm, usually reserved for major holidays. Mel presented the newlyweds with an envelope containing not only the money from the diner fund jar, but contributions from customers and neighboring businesses who had heard about the wedding and wanted to participate in the celebration. "Consider it a wedding gift from everyone who believes in what you two are building together," he said with gruff emotion. When the final count was tallied, the community contributions totaled enough to pay off the medical debt completely, with money left over for a modest honeymoon and the security deposit on a larger apartment that could accommodate their newly blended family. "I can't believe this is real," Rachel whispered to David as they watched their daughters teach the neighborhood children a complicated line dance that seemed to involve a lot of spinning and giggling. "I can't believe we almost let fear keep us from having it," David replied, pulling his wife closer as the evening lights made everything look soft and magical. The moving truck David had scheduled arrived as promised, but instead of loading their belongings for a trip to Denver, it was used to transport their combined households to a 3-bedroom apartment 6 blocks away, close enough to maintain their neighborhood connections, spacious enough for 2 adults and 2 children to build a life together. Sophia and Lucy supervised the movers with the authority of people who had very specific opinions about where furniture should be placed for maximum family harmony. Their new shared bedroom was arranged to accommodate both girls' belongings and personalities, creating a space that reflected their individual tastes while celebrating their sisterhood. As the sun set on their unexpected wedding day, David and Rachel stood in their new kitchen, surrounded by boxes that needed unpacking and children who needed baths and bedtime stories. The practical challenges of blended family life lay ahead, figuring out new routines, navigating the complications of sudden siblinghood, learning to be partners in parenting rather than solo managers of their individual children. But the hardest part was behind them. They had chosen love over fear, community over isolation, faith over practical concerns that could be solved with time and effort. The candy ring proposal had become a real marriage, the neighborhood support had become genuine financial relief, and 4 individual lives had become one family with twice the strength of its separate parts. "So," Rachel said, leaning against David's chest as they watched Sophia and Lucy arrange their stuffed animals in what appeared to be an elaborate sleeping formation, "how does it feel to be a married man with 2 daughters?" David kissed the top of his wife's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, mixed with the lingering fragrance of Mrs. Rodriguez's garden flowers. "It feels like coming home," he said simply. "Like everything that came before was just practice for this." 6 months later, the Martinez family had settled into the kind of comfortable routine that looked effortless from the outside, but required daily negotiations and small compromises that added up to something beautiful. David's alarm went off at 6:30 each morning, followed immediately by the sound of Sophia and Lucy's shared wake-up ritual, a whispered conference about the day's possibilities that usually involved elaborate plans for after-school adventures. Rachel had reduced her hours at the diner to part-time, using her mornings to manage the family's expanded administrative needs and her afternoons to be present when the girls returned from school. The financial breathing room provided by the community fundraising and David's steady construction income meant she could finally be the kind of mother she'd always wanted, to be present, patient, and able to say yes to small requests without calculating the cost. The professional family photo that now hung in their living room captured the four of them on a sunny Saturday in their shared backyard, surrounded by the garden they'd planted together, and the fence David had finally finished repairing. Sophia and Lucy flanked their parents with the confident smiles of children who knew themselves to be loved unconditionally, while David and Rachel wore the expression of people who had found exactly what they'd been searching for without realizing they were looking. But the photo that meant the most to all of them sat on Sophia's desk, Lucy's original drawing from their first evening together, depicting four stick figures holding hands in front of a house that somehow managed to look like home, despite being rendered in crayon by a 6-year-old artist. David's small repair business had grown through word-of-mouth recommendations and the kind of community support that turned neighborly favors into legitimate enterprise. His business cards, printed on Rachel's suggestion, read, "Martinez Family Repairs. No job too small, no family too large," a slogan that Sophia had suggested and Lucy had refined through several creative editing sessions. The Tuesday evening, when everything began, had become a family tradition. Every week, David would spread his tools across the back porch and invite both girls to join him in working on whatever needed fixing: bicycles, household items, or small construction projects that taught patience and problem-solving while strengthening the bonds between father and daughters. "Remember what we learned about fixing things that are broken?" David would ask as they worked, and both girls would recite in unison, "They just need someone who cares enough to figure out how to make them work again." Rachel had established her own tradition with the girls, Sunday morning cooking lessons that filled their apartment with the sense of fresh bread and collaborative laughter. Lucy had inherited her mother's patience with precise measurements, while Sophia brought creative flair that sometimes produced unexpected but delicious results. Their recipe collection had grown to include dishes from both family traditions, plus new experiments that reflected their blended heritage. The neighborhood had embraced the Martinez family expansion with the same wholehearted acceptance they'd shown during the wedding crisis. Mrs. Rodriguez appointed herself honorary grandmother to both girls, teaching them Spanish phrases and garden wisdom with equal enthusiasm. The Johnson children had gained 2 new playmates who brought fresh energy to their summer games. Mr. Patterson had become a regular dinner guest, his stories of neighborhood history providing entertainment that competed successfully with television. Mark Thompson had reappeared twice more in the months following David and Rachel's marriage, each visit shorter and less confident than the last. His attempts to reclaim a central role in Lucy's life had been met with polite but firm boundaries established by Rachel and quietly supported by David's steady presence. Lucy herself had grown confident enough to express her own preferences about family arrangements, requesting that her father's visits be scheduled rather than spontaneous, and always with the understanding that her daily life included both parents and both sisters in equal measure. The most recent visit had ended with Mark acknowledging what had been obvious to everyone else. Lucy had found the stable family structure she needed, and disrupting it would serve his needs rather than hers. His goodbye had included an apology to Rachel for the years of inconsistent support and a promise to contribute financially to Lucy's future education without expecting custody arrangements that would unsettle her established routine. "She's happy," Mark had admitted, watching Lucy and Sophia organize an elaborate tea party for their stuffed animals while David helped them construct furniture from cardboard boxes. "I can't give her what she has here." On a warm evening in late spring, as David finished teaching both girls how to adjust bicycle brakes, and Rachel prepared dinner with ingredients from their own small garden, The family gathered around their kitchen table with the comfortable familiarity of people who belonged exactly where they were. "Daddy," Sophia said, carefully cutting her chicken into precise pieces, "Lucy and I have been thinking about something important." "Oh," David replied, recognizing the tone that usually preceded requests for increased allowances or extended bedtimes. "We think you should teach other kids in the neighborhood how to fix things." Lucy continued, her 6-year-old diplomacy skills having developed considerably over the months. "Because lots of kids don't know how to repair stuff when it breaks, and that makes them sad when their toys don't work." Sophia nodded seriously. "And some parents don't know how to fix things either, so they throw away stuff that could be repaired if someone just showed them how." Rachel and David exchanged glances, recognizing the seed of an idea that could grow into something meaningful for their entire community. David's informal reputation as the neighborhood's go-to repair expert had already generated more requests than he could handle alongside his regular construction work. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Rachel asked, though she suspected she already knew where her daughter's thoughts were leading. "Saturday morning fix-it classes," both girls announced in unison, as if they'd been rehearsing this presentation for weeks. "In our backyard," Sophia added, "with different lessons for different ages. Lucy and I could be assistant teachers for the really little kids. And we could charge a small amount for materials," Lucy continued, her business instincts inherited from her mother's practical nature, but not so much that families couldn't afford it. "Just enough to buy supplies and maybe save some money for when people need bigger repairs they can't do themselves." David felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's thoughtfulness and community spirit. The idea was practical and generous, building on the neighborhood connections that had supported their family while creating a way to give back to the people who had invested in their happiness. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said, already imagining the logistics of transforming their backyard into a weekend classroom. "But it would be a lot of work to organize and manage." "We're good at organizing," Sophia pointed out. "We organized our whole wedding in one morning, and that turned out pretty well." Rachel laughed, remembering the chaos and joy of their impromptu ceremony. "You did indeed organize a very successful wedding. But teaching classes would be a regular commitment, every week for as long as people wanted to learn." "Good," Lucy said with the matter-of-fact determination that had first brought their families together. "Regular commitments are how you build things that last, like family and friendships, and knowing how to fix stuff when it breaks." The wisdom in her 6-year-old observation silenced the adults, who recognized the truth that children often grasped more clearly than grown-ups. Consistency and care were the foundations of everything worthwhile, whether repairing bicycles or building relationships. As they finished dinner and moved into their evening routine homework at the kitchen table, stories read aloud on the living room couch, teeth brushed and pajamas donned with the efficient teamwork of people who had learned to share space harmoniously. David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A broken bicycle chain on a Tuesday evening had led to a candy ring proposal, which had led to a community wedding, which had led to the kind of family life he'd stopped believing was possible after Maria's death. Sophia had gained not just a mother, but a sister who challenged her to be more patient and compassionate. Lucy had gained not just a father, but a sister who encouraged her to be braver and more adventurous. Rachel had gained not just a husband, but a partner who shared rather than created responsibility. And David had gained not just a wife, but a complete family that multiplied his capacity for joy rather than dividing his attention between competing needs. The Saturday morning fix-it classes began 3 weeks later, with 8 neighborhood children and 4 adults gathered in the Martinez backyard to learn basic tool safety and simple repair techniques. Sophia and Lucy served as assistant instructors with the seriousness of people who took their teaching responsibilities very seriously. while David discovered that explaining mechanical concepts to mixed-age groups required skills he'd never needed in construction work but found deeply satisfying to develop. Rachel managed the administrative side of their small enterprise, collecting modest fees that covered materials and contributed to a neighborhood emergency repair fund for families who couldn't afford major fixes. The classes grew by word of mouth, and within 2 months they were hosting workshops that attracted families from several surrounding blocks. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Rachel said one evening as they cleaned up after a particularly successful workshop that had taught 12 people how to repair torn window screens. "I think about that first Tuesday when Lucy asked you to marry me. How terrified I was that she'd embarrassed us both with her innocent honesty." David smiled, remembering Rachel's mortified expression when Lucy had made her bold suggestion through the fence. And now look what her innocent honesty created. "A whole life," Rachel mused, watching through the kitchen window as Sophia and Lucy worked together to organize tools for the next day's class. A family, a business, a community tradition, all because a 6-year-old believed that simple solutions could work for complicated problems. As they tucked both girls into their shared bedroom that night, listening to their whispered plans for tomorrow's adventures and the week's upcoming activities, David and Rachel marveled at how naturally their separate lives had woven together into something stronger than either could have created alone. "Good night, Sophia." "Good night, Lucy," Rachel said, kissing both girls with the equal affection of a mother whose heart had expanded to accommodate 2 daughters without diminishing her love for either. "Good night, Mommy." "Good night, Daddy," both girls replied in sleepy unison, using the family titles that had become as natural as breathing despite their recent origin. Later, as David and Rachel sat on their back porch, sharing the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived, they reflected on the journey that had brought them from isolated single parenthood to this moment of complete family contentment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Sophia's bicycle chain hadn't broken that day?" Rachel asked, settling against David's shoulder with the comfortable ease of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. "I think it would have broken eventually," David replied, stroking her hair as he watched the stars appear over Maple Street. "Some things are meant to happen, and they find a way to happen regardless of timing. Sophia needed you and Lucy in her life, just like Lucy needed us. And we needed each other, even when we were too scared to admit it. Lucy still has that candy ring, you know," Rachel mentioned with fond amusement. "She keeps it in her treasure box, along with the drawings from that first evening and a photo from our wedding. She calls it her family-making collection." David laughed softly, remembering the determined 6-year-old who had burst into their kitchen with a ring pop and a plan to solve all their problems through the simple expedient of honest communication and creative thinking. "She was right about everything," he admitted. "About us loving each other, about families being people who care for each other, about simple solutions sometimes being the right solutions. I spent so much time making things complicated when the answer was right there in front of me." "The answer was right there in front of both of us," Rachel corrected gently. "We just needed someone brave enough to say it out loud." As they prepared for bed in the home they'd built together, David and Rachel felt the deep satisfaction of people who had found their place in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, 2 children to raise, a business to manage, a community to serve, the daily work of marriage and parenthood, and citizenship that required constant attention and care. But tonight they were exactly where they belonged, in a house filled with the sound of children's peaceful breathing, in a neighborhood that had supported their love story from its tentative beginning to its joyful continuation, in a life that proved every day that the most precious things could grow from the simplest moments when people were brave enough to trust their hearts over their fears. The broken bicycle that had started, it all sat in their garage, fully repaired and waiting for Monday's ride to school, but its chain now gleamed with fresh oil and careful maintenance. a symbol of how things that seemed hopelessly tangled could be restored to perfect working order when someone cared enough to take the time to understand how all the pieces fit together. Just like families, just like love, just like the beautiful, complicated, wonderful life they were building one day at a time, with patience and hope and the kind of faith that believed broken things could always be made whole again when the right people decided to care for each other without conditions or expectations of return. In the end, Lucy Thompson had been absolutely right about everything. Sometimes the simplest answer was the correct answer. And sometimes all it took to change everything was one brave person willing to ask the question that everyone else was too scared to voice. "Mummy, why don't you just marry the nice man who fixes things?" Because love, it turned out, was the ultimate repair job, taking broken hearts and isolated lives and tangled circumstances and slowly, patiently, carefully working them back into something beautiful and functional and strong enough to last forever.